Hello everyone, and today I will share with you my GCSE French master plan in order to help you to get the best grade that you can get in your GCSE French. This is a plan on a page. On the left hand side are each of the themes and their subtopics, and on the right are all of your resources. The first column to the right of the topics, labeled self-score, should be the first column to be filled in, and in that column you would write in what grade you think you would get if you were to do an exam on that topic. And then afterwards, a brief list of the resources include your school notes, your CGP revision guides, CGP grammar books, your own notes, the Oxford textbook, a Pearson revision guide, Seneca, and online resources such as Vocab Express or Quizlet. As you can see, these are the resources which I had physically at the end of my French GCSEs, and this is what your pile may look like. Again, this is a list of my resources, but more extensive. From the top, we have your school notes, a CGP revision guide, the CGP grammar revision guide, along with the grammar workbook. My tutor had given me vocabulary sheets, the French Oxford textbook, oral answers, which were practice answers that I'd prepared for the first oral exam, the CGP Complete Revision Guide, workbooks which were given to me from school, Vocab Express, which is a website which your school may have access to, Languages Online, which is another website which goes through grammar points and verb conjugations, CGP practice questions to go along with the revision guides as practice exam papers. We were given a GCSE French workbook from school as well, and finally a website called Seneca, which I'll go into more detail later. Going into more depth of the resources, firstly, and the first thing which you should look at is the specification from AQA or Edexcel or whichever exam board, or from the website of whichever exam board you're doing the GCSE French with. The specification provides the bare minimum of the vocabulary and grammar points which you need to know for your GCSE. Secondly, you have your school notes, bits of vocabulary or more grammar points which you've learned from your teacher in school, which you would have been encouraged to note down. Thirdly, you have your own notes, which could comprise of lists of vocabulary which you may find difficult to learn, or some small pointers on how to correctly conjugate certain verbs, or additional grammar points which you think that you could use in your exam. As you can see in the bottom right hand corner, you can see a picture of my own notes, and you may be wondering, what have I got in my folder? Well, I'll tell you now. Firstly, I have my specification from the AQA website printed off and filed away, and then separated by each theme, I have my own worksheets and practice essays that I've done. Additionally, I have multiple plastic files completely filled to the brim with additional grammar exercises which I've done to death in order to completely understand how to use certain grammar points. In addition, I have printed off numerous practice papers for all listening, reading, writing, and sample speaking exam questions, for which I've written practice answers for and had them marked by my teacher in order to see how well I would have done if that was an actual exam. One of the most useful resources which is available to you are the textbooks which you go through in school. So I did higher tier French, which is the textbook on the left in the bottom left image, which is red and says French higher on it. There is also a foundation tier. It's important that you get the correct textbook for the tier which you're doing, and if you're unsure about that, then you can ask your teacher, or you could check the specification as to what you're learning compared to which tier. There are differences between the tiers, for example, what you're examined on and the extent of the vocabulary which you need to know, which we'll get into later when I go through the exams. Depending on the textbook which you use, your school may also have given you online access to it through a website called Kerboodle. For example, the Oxford textbook is available on Kerboodle as a digital book, which you can then go through on your phone or at home if there's anything that you want to go through again without having to buy your own copy of the textbook. Other resources you may use include these 4 CGP books, from left to right: the Complete Revision Guide, the Revision Guide, the French Grammar Workbook, and the French Grammar Handbook. I highly recommend the Complete Revision Guide along with the Grammar Handbook. The Revision Guide goes into a lot of depth on the vocabulary and ideas which you may want to consider on each of the topics, while the Grammar Handbook explains different grammar points in a way that makes it easy to understand. Along with the Grammar Handbook, you have the Grammar Workbook, which allows you to practice and hone your skills in French grammar. Some other resources you may consider include the CGP Exam Practice Workbook, which allows you to do practice exams at home in your own time and compare your answers with the mark scheme in order to practice your exam technique. And on the right is a French revision workbook by Pearson. This allows you again to practice your exam technique, but specifically to each topic, allowing you to practice each topic and theme depending on what you feel that you need to revise at that point. A fantastic website which you have available to you for free is senecalearning.com. This website has split French down into its 3 themes, which are further split into their subtopics, along with 2 sections on simple and advanced grammar techniques. Seneca explains vocabulary in short bursts and then tests you on those new pieces of vocabulary periodically in order to ensure that you remember what you've learned. Furthermore, it also allows you to further practice your grammar techniques on its grammar section. Before getting into more depth in the 4 exams, I'll just give a small bit of information. Each exam, no matter what it's marked off, will be given the same weighting towards your final grade. So if an exam is marked out of 40, your mark will be scaled as if that exam were marked out of 60. The first exam that you'd give would be your oral exam, which you'd give a few weeks before your GCSEs actually start. This is to allow enough time for the audio files, which would be sent to the exam board, to all be marked and gone through. The second and third exam, which you normally sit in the same sitting, would be your reading and listening exam. And then finally, a week later, you'll have your writing exam, and then that will be the end of your French GCSE. Now onto the exam papers. This is where you will find the deviation between the foundation tier and the higher tier. So first you have paper 1, which is a written exam. For foundation tier it's 35 minutes, while it's 45 minutes for the higher tier. The test will be marked out of 40 or 50 respectively, depending on your tier, foundation or higher, and is worth a total of a quarter of your GCSE. Each exam will also include 5 minutes of reading time for the question paper before the first question is played. In both exams you have 2 sections, section A and section B. Section A, your questions are to be answered in English or as multiple choice, while in section B your answers must be written in French or again as multiple choice. The second exam is your speaking paper. This paper does not take place with the rest of your GCSEs, but a few months prior in order to allow enough time to mark it. There are 3 sections to this paper. and altogether it will be between 7 and 9 minutes for foundation tier, and between 10 and 12 minutes for the higher tier, along with your preparation time. This is also worth a quarter of your GCSE, and is out of a total of 60 marks. The 3 sections are the same for both foundation and higher. However, with higher tier there will be different stimulus questions for the photo card and different materials for the role play, along with the timings, which also differ. The role play is worth 15 marks, and you have a total of 2 minutes to go through that in your oral exam. The photo card is worth another 15 of the 60 marks. For that you'll be given 2 minutes at foundation or 3 minutes at higher tier. Finally, you have the general conversation, which is worth half of your speaking exam. At foundation tier, there will be 3 to 5 minutes of conversation, while at higher tier there will be between 5 and 7 minutes of conversation. The general conversation will be split between your chosen theme and an additional theme which will be selected by the exam board. And roughly half of your conversation will be on each theme. So for foundation, you may spend 2.5 minutes on theme 1, which is family and friends, while you may spend the other 2.5 minutes talking about theme 3, which is education and work life. Some additional information for the format of the speaking exam. Just before your exam, you'll be given 12 minutes of preparation time, in which you'll be given your photo card and role play in order to prepare your own answers for in your exam. For this, you'll be given 12 minutes, and I recommend that you spend no more than 5 minutes on the role play, as all you require would be 4 simple answers. And you spend the rest of your time, approximately 7 minutes, on your photo card, in which you can prepare more extended and complex answers in order to get higher marks. An example roleplay will first you'll be given instructions. It would say your teacher will play the part of your French friend, for example, and you should address your friend as tu. You'll then be given 5 bullet points, 5 prompts on the chosen topic. For example, if it was on free time, an example roleplay from the specimen papers is as follows. Tu parles avec ton ami français de la musique et des loisirs. You speak with a French friend about music and free time activities. The 4 prompts that you're given, the first one is concert hier avec qui? A concert yesterday with who? So from that you'd have to interpret that you went on a concert yesterday and who you went with. Another prompt which you're given for a question which you'll have to ask your teacher is first you have a question mark and then goût musicaux, which translates to taste in music. So for that prompt, you should ask your teacher and or examiner a question about their musical tastes. Secondly, you have your photo card. So for an example from the specimen, this is card M if you want to find it on freeexampapers.com. The picture is of a beach in the summertime, and you can see many people with like their umbrellas up, sunbathing, for example. The first question will always be qu'est-ce qu'il y a sur la photo, or what is there in the picture, and for that you would give a description of what you can see. In order to gain higher marks, you should give an extended response in which you could give an opinion and justify it in order to gain higher marks. The second and third prompts for this photo card are as follows. Tu préfères aller en vacances avec ta famille ou tes amis, et pourquoi? Do you prefer going on a holiday with your friends or with your family, and why? And the third prompt you're given is Où es-tu allé en vacances l'année dernière? Where did you go on holiday last year? You'll then be given 2 more questions, which you wouldn't have prepared for. So these questions could, as it's on the theme of holidays and free time, one way may be qu'est-ce que tu as fait le week-end dernier? What did you do last weekend? And for that, you'd give an appropriate response and attempts to incorporate higher level structures again in order to gain higher marks. The third exam paper is your reading paper, which is 45 minutes long for foundation tier or an hour long for higher tier. Again, this exam paper is worth 60 marks, or it's a quarter for your GCSE. In each reading paper for foundation or for higher, there will be 3 sections. Section A, your questions should be answered in English or as multiple choice. Section B, your answers and questions will also be in French or non-verbally. And then there's a third section, which is a translation from French into English, which would be at least 35 words at foundation tier or 50 words at higher tier. Your final French exam paper will be the writing paper. For foundation tier and for higher tier, you'll be given 1 hour or 1 hour and 15 minutes respectively. The paper will be marked out of 50 for foundation or 60 at higher tier, and this paper is also worth a quarter for the GCSE. So each of the exam papers is given the same weight. At higher tier, question 1, you'll have to write about 90 words, from which you'll be given a choice between 2 questions, and question 1 is out of 16 marks. Question 2 for the higher tier is an open-ended writing task, in which you again have a choice between 2 questions, and you should write approximately 150 words. This question is worth 32 marks. And finally, you have question 3, which is translation from English into French, which is worth another 12 marks. Meanwhile, for foundation, question 1 is a message in which you'd produce 4 sentences in response to a photo, similar to the photo card activity in your speaking exam. Question 2, you'd write a short passage, which is approximately 40 words, in response to 4 brief bullet points. Question 2 will be marked out of 16. Your third question will be a translation from English into French, which is worth 10 marks. And finally, you have question 4, which overlaps with question 1 of the higher tier, as a 90-word essay, from which you have a choice between 2 questions, and is also worth 16 marks. As an example for a crossover question on the writing paper, this is from the 2015 specimen paper for AQA. It is as follows, and you can see in the bottom right corner. Vous décrivez là où vous habitez pour votre blog. You're describing the place that you live in for your blog, and then you're given your 4 bullet points. Décrivez votre ville et ses attractions, les aspects positifs et négatifs de votre maison, une visite récente à votre ville, où vous voulez habiter à l'avenir. If you look at the 4 bullet points, you'll notice that the first 2 prompts are for the present tense. The third bullet point prompts the past tense, and the fourth bullet point has a prompt for the future tense, where you would like to live in the future. Ensure that you do make reference to all the time frames, as that is how you'll get higher marks. And finally, at the end of the question, it says écrivez environ 90 mots en français, répondez à chaque aspect de la question. So write approximately 90 words in French and respond to each aspect of the question. And as it says in the mark scheme, your top students who gain the higher marks will have written a response to each of the bullet points. In your exams, you'll be faced with numerous types of questions. So this will be a brief summary as to the different types of questions and how best to go about answering them. So firstly, in both your listening and reading exam, there'll be a plethora of multiple choice questions. These are typically 1 mark per correct answer. A good method in making sure that you get these easy marks is to eliminate false answers and be careful of any traps in the words that the speaker might say. A second type of question which may come up in your listening and reading exam are short response questions. For those, it would normally require only 1 or 2 words, or at most a sentence. These questions are typically in section B, where you have to respond to the questions in French. The third main type of question, which is worth quite a few marks, are translations. There will be 2 translations that you have to do, one in the reading exam from French into English, and one in the writing exam, which is from English into French. Keep in mind that when translating, try and keep the text natural, make it sound natural, but maintain the same meaning. Marks will be awarded for every clause or every few words which you've translated correctly. And as long as the original meaning of the passage comes across, then you'll be given the marks. Finally, this is for higher tier students, the 150-word essay, which is worth more than half of the marks in your writing exam, and is arguably one of the hardest questions that you'll have to do in your French exams. So firstly, make sure that you're answering the correct question, and be careful of which tense the question is asking for. Secondly, make sure that you use a reference to all 3 time frames. Otherwise, you won't be able to get above 12 out of 18 marks on your content. You need to make sure that you refer to the past in some method using either the perfect or imperfect. You want to ensure that you mention the present, which is generally what the first bullet point is in, and you also want to ensure that you mention the future. Thirdly, and most importantly, ensure that you justify any opinions you give. Don't just say bien, don't just say it's good, say it's good because I enjoy it, or because I find it interesting. Finally, try and use higher level structures or higher level grammar points, such as the subjunctive conjugations of verbs or idioms which you may come across. Even if you use these higher level structures incorrectly, you can only gain marks for trying them. One important thing to keep in mind is between sections A and B in your listening and reading exams, ensure that you're answering in the right language. If you don't know which language to write in, look at the language the question is in and answer in that same language. So if the question says, what does this person enjoy doing? Well, that's in English, so you'd respond in English. But if the question was, for example, que aimerais-tu ce weekend? What would you like to do in the weekend? That question is in French, so you should give your answer in French. Key things to remember is to justify any opinions that you give, ensure that you mention all 3 tenses, and attempt complex structures even in your 90-word essay or your 40-word task. In the writing exam, when you're forced to choose between 2 questions which you may do, answer the question on the topic that you're more familiar with. And if you're in doubt, pick the question in which you know for a fact that you can easily use more complex structures which you may have memorized previously. And finally, make sure that you answer the question. Ensure that you're answering the correct question. So circle or highlight or understand what the command word in the question is. Is it asking who? Is it asking why? Or how? Or what? Or is asking it in French, for example, qui, pourquoi, quoi, or quel. This is a list of the resources which I had available to me. On the left hand side is the list of them for French, and then on the right hand side are additional columns which you'd fill in with the dates on which you completely revise from that resource. For example, you could see that for the oral answers which I'd prepared, I'd revise them once on the 13th of April and again on the 23rd of April. It's useful to see how many times you've gone through each resource so that you know which resource that you may want to go through again, or you can see which resource you found the most useful in revising for your GCSE. For exam preparation, it is slightly different for French. Of course, practice questions and practice papers are always important. As you can see in the top right hand corner is freeexampapers.com, which has a archive of multiple exam papers, including from the old specification for French, which you can practice from. Other websites which you may think of using is Languages Online, which goes through grammar points and verb conjugations in a helpful and interactive way. On the lower left hand corner you can see an image of Vocab Express, which your school may have access to. This website is very useful in revising vocabulary, as it's split each section into much smaller manageable bits of vocabulary which you can learn in small sections. In addition, the use of a score system gives you a sense of accomplishment, as you can see how much of French that you actually know. And finally, in the bottom right hand corner, you can see the website Quizlet. On this website, what some teachers or other kind people have done is gone through the vocabulary section on in the textbooks and taken all of the vocabulary and put it in a Quizlet. For Quizlet, it's a very useful revision tool which has a flashcard mode in which you can practice your translations between words from English to French or vice versa. And there is also a new mode which was added recently, which allows you to test yourself. It will first give you multiple choice questions for translating from French to English. Then you'd have to type out the translation from French to English, and then finally you translate it from English into French. And then at that point you'd have mastered that set of vocabulary. If you're unsure where to find the different Quizlets on each of the individual topics, go to your textbook and find the name of the topic and type that in the search bar. As you can see in the corner, I've searched 8.1H, a topic called Quelles vacances in my textbook, and you can see the top two results are from teachers who've put in multiple terms into the Quizlet to allow you to revise from. In summary, these are the key points which you should take away from this presentation. Firstly, to create your own notes after you complete a topic in school. Whether these notes are on any grammar points you learn, or on bits of vocabulary which you may find difficult to translate, you want to create your own lists of these. It's very helpful to compile these both from your school notes, from the numerous CGP revision guides. Vocab Express is a helpful resource, and BBC Bite Size can also be a help. One very important thing is the mark scheme, as that is what dictates what will or will not give you the mark. So I'd recommend that when you do practice tests or practice questions, that you physically write down the answers to your question, and then once you've done the questions in exam-like conditions, you can compare your answers to the mark scheme and see how you would have fared if it was an actual exam. Practicing has become much more important in French given the oral exam for which you have the general conversation. What most teachers recommend, and what I would definitely recommend, is to create practice speaking answers to sample questions which your teacher may ask you. For example, a question could be, what would you like to study in college? And then for that, a simple answer could be that you would want to study, for example, French because you enjoy the subject. However, in your speaking exam, you may want to prepare further, so you can prepare answers for questions which may come up, and ensure that they contain complex structures which allows you to get higher marks in your speaking exam. Finally, your teacher may choose to offer additional classes either during lunchtimes or after school in order to help with your speaking exam or your listening and reading exams. I highly recommend that if any opportunity your teacher provides, you take it with both hands, as all the additional help which you'll be given can only serve to benefit you in your exams.